Neon Genesis Evangelion is known for being one of the most influential anime of all time, if not the most influential anime of all time. At least, I'd argue so. So it makes me wonder, why would the creator think that it's a good idea to remake such a well-crafted and loved franchise? And of course, how could it surpass, or at the very least, match the original? Well, frankly, when it comes to the Eva rebuilds, they don't even come close. Neon Genesis Evangelion is a story that I hold very dear to me. In fact, it is my favorite anime, and I wouldn't be making this video if it wasn't. But after seeing the Eva fanbase's reaction to Thrice Upon a Time, made me wonder, what made them such fans of the original series in the first place? When I first watched Eva, I was pretty unaware of its high status and up-their-ass attitude of the fanbase. Rather, the one thing I knew about it was that it was supposed to be, quote-unquote, depressing. And when I hear people describe a story as such, I never really expect it to actually carry any emotional resonance. And I still don't. I usually take it as a dare when I watch those sorts of media. And I always go in with cynicism, because if it actually carried any emotional resonance, it would influence me, despite my cynicism. And Neon Genesis Evangelion did exactly that. Unfortunately, this video isn't about discussing the magic of the original series, but rather it is a harsh criticism of the rebuild tetralogy. If it already wasn't apparent enough from my last sentence, I am someone who does not like the rebuilds. And of course, every piece of media has a point to make money. Where I find fault is when that's its only purpose. And that seems to be the case for most spin-offs. After all, the only reason they exist is due to their predecessor's success. And I'm making this video to show that that especially holds true in the case of the rebuilds. And to prove this, I think it would be best to judge the rebuilds based on their own merit, which is why I'm going to try and compare the original series as little as possible in this part of the video. But before I do that, I must summarize this dumpster fire. Shinji Ikari, the protagonist, is trying to find his way to Nerve. Unfortunately, there's an angel attack. It is at this point that Masato Katsuragi picks up Shinji and saves him from getting stomped by the angel. After they arrive at Nerve, Gendo and friends pressure Shinji into fighting the angel. Shinji then goes on to refuse to get in the Eva, so they guilt trip him instead, which ends up working. Anyways, Shinji defeats the angel and everyone celebrates. But wait a second, Shinji just moved here and has nowhere to stay, so Masato takes him into her place. But after Shinji's school gets wind of what he's been doing, this character, Toji, isn't very happy with Shinji because he thinks he's responsible for his sister's injuries. A little while after Shinji's beatdown, another angel attacks, and this time, Shinji does not hesitate to fight it. But Kensuke, Toji's friend, convinces him to watch the fight because, well, Kensuke wants to see the fight. They unintentionally prevent Shinji from fighting back, causing them to be put in the entry plug with Shinji. After Toji experiences what Shinji has to go through in an angel battle, he befriends Shinji shortly after. There's also this part where Shinji runs away because Masato yelled at him for winning, but, it doesn't take long for him to get back. Anyways, boom! Another angel attacks. Shinji gets in per usual, then Ramiel proceeds to bake him in his own Eva. After Shinji recovers, for some reason I can't imagine why, but Shinji's a little hesitant to get back in. So Masato shows Shinji Lilith, which is where the humans spawned from, and if an angel ever comes in contact with her, it will cause third impact, which will wipe out all of humanity. The second impact killed half of humanity, and the first impact is a little ambiguous of what happened, but I'm pretty sure it's when the white moon, where Adam came from, who spawned the angels, and the black moon, where Lilith came from and spawned the humans, collided on Earth together at the same time. Anyways, Rei and Shinji get in their respective Evas and kill the angel, and we get treated to a very pogger scene. I wonder where they got it from. 2.0 begins with Mari battling an angel. Cool. Then Shinji and his father visit the grave of Shinji's mom. But oh no, an angel attack. Oh wait, never mind. Anyways, we get introduced to Asuka, and she's a prick. Also Kaji. Cool beans. Then Asuka moves in with Shinji. Then they go to an aquarium, which clearly is the most entertaining bit about this whole movie, shown by the characters' faces. Also, Kaji talks about Misato's past. In the end, does it matter? No. Oh look, another angel attack. Great. Shinji goes Sonic mode. That was pretty cool, I guess. After which, Asuka comes to the realization that she can't kill angels by herself, and decides to sleep next to Shinji.
Don't turn around.
Rei asks Gendo to have dinner with Shinji, and eventually, after flat out lying, he says yes. Hey look, it's Mari. I hate these films. Anyways, after that awful scene, Kaji molests Shinji in his melon farm. Rei begins to cook for Shinji for their dinner, and then Asuka starts to cook too for Shinji. And oh look, Nerve gets a new Ava. Then Asuka's unit gets lowered into storage because something Vatican Treaty. This in return causes Asuka to pilot the new unit. Though, this now begs the question, what was the point of getting the new unit in the first place? But uh-oh, an angel attack. The new unit is infected with the angel. Oh no! Shinji refuses to attack the new unit because Asuka's in it, so Gendo does it for him. Shinji throws a tantrum and then tries to run away. Then boom, an angel fight. Mari goes beast mode and fails, but convinces Shinji to get in his Ava. But because Rei got absorbed into the angel, Shinji starts near third impact, and Karu stops him last second. Now here's where things get a little fuzzy. After a couple of months after the whole ordeal, Kaji gets Misato pregnant and starts a rebellion against Nerve, called Vile, who wear blue bandanas, because Nerve's logo is red. Get it? Anyways, Gendo gets pissy that his whole staff betrayed him, and then tells Karu to initiate third impact. 3.0 starts off with the most nauseating action scene I have ever had the misfortune of witnessing. Apparently, Asuka and Mari were on a mission to retrieve Unit 1, Shinji's Ava, which just so happened to have Shinji in it. Anyways, why Unit 1 is apparently in space, only Ano knows. And let's be honest here, he only added it in because it looked cool. Anyways, Shinji finds himself on this weird ship called the Wunder, and almost everyone on the crew is leering at him for causing N3I. And the most boring action scene I have ever had the misfortune of watching proceeds to take place. And I know I haven't gotten to the review portion yet, but it was at this point of rewatching 3.0 that it seemed like sticking my member into a wood chipper would be more enjoyable than watching another frame of this awful so-called film. They then explain to Shinji that they put a DSS choker on him to prevent him from awakening the Ava again. Asuka's mad. How unlike her. Rei puts a hole in the wall and then they yell at Shinji some more, and he takes his leave. Gendo says words, specifically about piloting Unit 13 with Karu. Rei is more Rei than ever. Shinji and Karu bond by playing the piano together. Karu tells him that it's all his fault. It is then revealed that Shinji's mom is fused with his Ava, and that Rei is a clone of his mom. Also, self-awareness.
Breaking apart the world is a trivial matter. However, rebuilding it is not so easy.
We get a pretty neat shot of Shinji losing it, which, last time I checked, doesn't make up for the crap that this film pulls. Karu takes off his DSS choker and wears it. They get into Unit 13 and head down towards Lilith. They then encounter Asuka and Mari. Shinji then almost causes fourth impact, but Karu's head explodes and then Shinji gets ejected from Unit 13. Then Asuka pulls him out of the entry plug. 4.0 starts off with a fight. Yes. It is a fight. It's not a good one though. Asuka takes Shinji to the village. Toji takes care of Shinji for a bit, but Shinji ends up going with Kensuke. We learn that Asuka and Kensuke have a past. Asuka gets mad at Shinji again and he takes his leave. Rei does some farming. and then convinces Shinji to start helping out. So, Shinji does just that. He does some fishing and stuff. Yes, indeed, he does some stuff with Kaji Jr. This in return causes Shinji to recover from his PTSD of Karu exploding. Then, Rei explodes in front of Shinji. And in classic Shinji fashion, he asks to be brought back onto the Wunder with Asuka? Ritsuko and Misato have an exposition dump about what Kaji was trying to do with Ville. Asuka and Mori visit Shinji, to which Shinji realizes that Asuka was mad at him because he didn't want to take responsibility for her death. There's a big action fight sequence that looks awful. Then the Ville crew realize that they can only stop Gendo if they let Shinji pilot Unit 1. And cue therapy sequence. Shinji essentially makes a new world, or in other words, a Neon Genesis! Then, Mari and Shinji run off into the sunset. The end. Anyways, let's get into the reviewing of the rebuilds. This movie assumes that you watched Neon Genesis Evangelion, Doritos, stiff CG animation, and maybe the biggest plot hole of this entire movie. The men's bathroom is spotless. The added CG limbs to Shamshell look retarded. There's a massive plot convenience halfway in the film.
Okay, I've had enough of this. You can take me back to Miss Misato now. Okay, I've had enough of this. You can take me back to Miss Misato now. Of this. He's avoiding me.
Truth is, the game was rigged from the start.
Apparently, your son behaved exactly the way we had anticipated.
Yes, he did. Now I just have to push him a little closer to Rei. Everything is proceeding according to plan.
Why on earth would Shinji need to get closer to Rei for instrumentality to work? Scenes don't flow very well and cuts are unnatural and abrupt.
You still seem a little nervous. You shouldn't be. It's not your first time living with a man.
Yeah, but it's not like 8 years ago. It's not a romantic relationship this time.
I wouldn't be so sure.
Ritsuko implies that Misato and Shinji have a romantic relationship, despite lambasting the idea moments earlier.
I promise I'm not gonna mess around with him. I know he's just a kid.
Of course you won't! How can you even say things like that? And do you realize...
Miss Researcher hasn't found her sense of humor yet.
Shinji for some reason doesn't give Rei her card on the train. Ritsuko for some reason exposition dumps information that Misato already knows to, well, Misato.
Operation Yashimo. As the name implies, the entirety of Japan will devote its electricity to power a self-propelled, high-powered positron cannon you requisitioned from the SSDF. Since the cannon is not fully operational yet, an Ava will execute the high-precision targeting.
It's never explained why Lilith is on the moon, and the reason for why Karu's on the moon is only partially explained. This movie's overall score is 7.3. The angel design looks goofy.
I think
feel bad about using adults as pawns for my benefit.
We later find out that Mari is like 40 during the scene, so it doesn't really make much sense for her to say that. For some reason, Nerve and Misato just now find out about the angel attack long after the military has. This action scene with Asuka has no tension. Having them move in together is unnecessary, especially when you consider why Misato even made them live together in the original series. Unnecessary, over-the-top, cartoonish fan service scene. Since there's no actual backstory behind the puppet, and seemingly never will be, we can assume that Asuka is crazy. Wow, look at all those CG people walking around the city. Yeah, you wouldn't get away with that in school, much less in the classroom in front of everyone where there are bound to be snitches.
Nice to finally meet you, father.
Why is Kaoru calling Gendo father? Is it perhaps, as the fan theories say, that he's a clone of Shinji? That makes some of their future feelings and scenes a little bit more awkward. Meaningless use of the Sephiroth because it's Eva. Right guys? The aquarium scene is utterly pointless. Misato's backstory presentation is over the top, less dramatic, and cliche. Once again, Shinji turns into Sonic. Remember when Shinji could barely even walk? He's come so far in the canonical couple of weeks. The angel once again looks goofy. It is at this point where this starts to feel more like a poorly written slice of life rather than an intelligent piece of art. Like how the original series was. That is not how green screens work. You work in entertainment, Anno, you should know this. The Vatican Treaty. Oh, the Vatican Treaty. The Vatican Treaty is a plot device inside the rebuild of Eva to force Asuka to pilot Unit 3. I mean, it's a treaty to make sure that one country doesn't have too many Evas. Which sounds logical on paper, but isn't in actuality. The problem sets in when you realize that NERV is not a military branch of multiple countries to fight the Angels, but instead is an entirely private organization merely funded by those multiple governments for protection from the Angels. Or at least that's what the show and rebuilds imply. So while those governments commission NERV for their protection, they still do not own those Evas. Which means, in reality, it doesn't really even matter if there are too many Evas in one area because it's not the local governments that get to decide whether or not the Evas take over the world. That decision would be left up to NERV, or the shadow organization that runs NERV, Sele.
Why does my Unit 2 have to be placed in storage?
You know about the Vatican Treaty. These are the terms for accepting Unit 3.
Why don't you store Unit 0? It's not even fully repaired!
The Euro branch is in charge.
And it doesn't make any sense why they would even store Unit 2 instead of Unit 0 because even though the Euro branch owns Unit 2, it still is ultimately owned by NERV and Sele. And what's the point of even storing it when they make it seem like Unit 2 can be pulled from storage at any time? I could go on, but I think you get the idea. Anno sloppily added in a vague plot device, creating plot holes upon plot holes, just to make 2.0 slightly different from Neon Genesis. Imagine that. Ah yes, Shinji is going God mode. Gotta love Deus Ex Machinas. This movie moves at a snail's pace while somehow feeling like it's rushing during its important scenes. This is because, to much surprise, it fills most of its runtime with filler rather than scenes that actually matter, which, believe it or not, is not something you are supposed to do when you are making a movie. Overall score? 5. 3.0 starts off with a nauseating and confusing action sequence, followed by another confusing and uninteresting action sequence, but that was talked about prior. Actually, it feels like that the only reason they had these action scenes in there is to pad out the runtime. The Wunder looks utterly retarded, along with the rest of the flying naval ships. Ah yes, Asuka's mad at Shinji, cause a near third impact, right? Dang! Fuyutsuki's pretty good with those lights, considering that he's the only other person there. Hey, I wonder, if this Rei smoked a blunt, would that make her a baked potato? What's the point of checking in with Sele if you could easily blow them away with your laser eyes? Why on earth would Shinji put the Walkman on a stool in front of the door? You're not gonna question how Kaoru can just walk down with ease without a hazmat suit? Really?
Shinji Ikari. Once awakened, Ava Unit 1 opened the doors of Guff and acted as the trigger to bring about the third impact. The Lilin call it the near third impact. You were the key to all of this.
We saw Kaoru stop it from happening in 2.0, confirmed in 3.0 plus 1.0, and the damage that we saw being done before Kaoru stopped it was on par with an average angel fight. So how on earth could he have possibly caused all this damage?
As a consequence, the Lilin made you bear the wages of that sin. Isn't that what that thing on your neck represents?
Yes, you gotta love when the creator explains their symbolism to you through a character. Who's controlling the lights? Kaoru?
I understand. I'll take the Lilin curse and the risk of the Ava awakening on myself.
Are you not gonna ask how he did it? Also, why not just throw it into the corner and let it explode on its own? But no, we need symbolism that we can explain in detail to our audience.
Evangelion Unit 13, activate!
Remember when they said that even if you boarded an Ava, it wouldn't even activate? Well, I guess that scene gets retconned anyways in 3.0 plus 1.0, so what does it even matter?
We should stop this, Shinji. I have a bad feeling.
Why doesn't Shinji listen to Kaoru? It seems a bit out of character considering that Kaoru is the most trustworthy character out of any of the cast that he's met so far in this movie. These fights are as goofy as it gets.
I do not know how or why, but a fourth impact was averted. Misato, that's something to be thankful for.
What do you mean you don't know how? Because it seemed to me it stopped because Shinji got ejected from the entry plug. Dang, Shinji is cheeked up. This movie's overall score gets a 3. Why do all the new enemies look so goofy? Why do they all have the Spear of Longinus? Why does this action scene even exist? It's not like anyone would ask questions about where they got the armor from. After all, no one asked where Mari got her odd armor edition from. The enemies may look goofy, but I think the Ava flying ships looks even goofier. Well, that action was utterly pointless. Why are they acting like they were good friends? It seems like their relationship only lasted like a couple of months or even less. Or at least, that's what 1.0 and 2.0 made it seem like.
All the troubles that followed brought them closer together. See, Ikari? Some good came out of that close call.
Well, the way that this is phrased makes it seem like Ida knows that Shinji caused N3I, which likely means that the rest of the village knows that as well. Keep that in mind as it will become relevant shortly. Boy, I wonder if the puppet will get explained by this last film instead of relying on Neon Genesis.
You Ayanami series have been adjusted so that you will hold affection toward the third boy. The emotions you're feeling right now have been rigged by nerve.
Why is that so? Wasn't Rei supposed to be the placeholder for Yui, along with being the catalyst to Third Impact? Why on earth would Gendo see it fit for her to be programmed to like Shinji?
But why is everyone so kind to me?
It's because we like you.
Why? Why do they like Shinji? Especially if they know he caused N3I. It doesn't make any sense why they like Shinji.
She's attached to you more than she is to me.
Why is she attached to Rei more than Hikari? Is it to perhaps sell more figures? And the only point of Rei being in these films is just for that reason? Or is it maybe some sort of meta-narrative on waifus and escapism that you have to squint your eyes to even see the thin outline of it? And the increased selling power of Rei merchandise is nothing more than just a side effect? Odd. I love how everything that's unimportant takes up an exorbitant amount of runtime in these films, yet everything important is usually skipped over or merely explained away with exposition dumps. As the saying goes, tell, don't show, am I right? Remember that Rei takes up a major amount of screen time in this film, yet in the end, she has contributed practically nothing except maybe getting Shinji to come out of his shell just a little bit.
I wanted to be with the boy I liked forever. Goodbye.
Now, I'm not a psychologist, but I highly doubt that this is how a recovering PTSD victim would act after seeing yet another friend explode right in front of them. Especially not Shinji. Also, why does Shinji get a choice in coming back? Shouldn't they be forcibly imprisoning him like the last time? After all, he did just try to cause fourth impact not too long ago. It was about at this time where I checked the runtime and wanted to kill myself. I wasn't even halfway. Heck, I wasn't even an hour in.
This movie felt like it was 4 fucking hours long.
They also ask why he'd come back as, I assume, a moment of Anno becoming self-aware, but then again, the question is never answered. Mari wasn't in the books before. Not really a point in adding this characteristic unless Anno's wife picked up reading books in between the time of 3.0 and this train wreck.
That child doesn't need a lover. He needs a mother.
He needs a mother. Wow. So deep. Really cutting into the roots of this version of Shinji, aren't we? Perhaps Anno forgot he wasn't working at NGE anymore. You guys hear that? It sounds like unnatural exposition dumping, because both Masato and Ritsuko should have known this long ago, and should not be explaining this to each other all of a sudden.
Misato, I know under that stoic facade of yours you're ecstatic about Shinji returning to you.
Oh yeah, you can really tell that she's ecstatic. Good thing we have plot device Ritsuko that can read Masato like a book.
They dwell within the fibers of hair. It's an apt representation of the chaotic nature of mankind. It's unequivocal proof that you're a human, Your Highness.
Proves that you are human. I hope that that was an attempt at comedy because that was pretty funny.
Since this is farewell, I want to ask you something. Did you figure out why I wanted to clobber you?
I did nothing to escape responsibility.
Well, I see you've matured a little.
You know, I'd say it's a bit petty to hold a grudge against a 14-year-old boy that didn't want to take responsibility for killing you. I don't think I have to acknowledge how silly and non-suspenseful every action scene looks from this point on, since most people that give this film praise are vaguely aware of that fact. But I am gonna ask how on earth a frail old man and Gendo were able to make so many Evas by themselves. No man, perhaps it's just because Gendo's like a demigod now.
An AT field? Unit 13 isn't supposed to have an AT field. Wait a minute. Is this my own Ava's AT field? Is my new Unit 2 afraid of Unit 13?
Since when can AT fields do that? Oh, I'll tell you, never. Until now at least, because it's convenient for the plot.
No hesitation to do anything to accomplish the mission.
Yes, I learned that as being a virtue from you.
This is honestly the best part of the movie.
The third impact purified the Earth.
If third impact was what purified the Earth, what did N3I do out of what was shown? Like I said before, it doesn't even show it doing much damage when you compare it to the angel fights.
Mr. Ikari is our savior and our destroyer!
Boy, this movie sure knows how to over-explain things that don't need any explanation, and not explain things that do. Boy, I sure do love getting a screen full of Sakura's disaster in a dramatic scene. Honor really knows where to place his fan service, which is apparently everywhere.
The only thing a son can do for his father is pat him on his shoulder. Or kill him. That's something
Kaji used to say to me.
Yeah, I don't care what you say, those words of Kaji make zero sense. No, I wasn't gonna say it, but the CGI here looks awful, like, more than it usually does in this film.
The two Evas are perfect counterparts. Unit 1 embodies hope, Unit 13 despair.
Do you really have to explain that this fight is hope versus despair? Are you making this for children? Cause it sure seems like it. Yeah, you're gonna have a hard time getting more on the nose than that. Man, Eva Imaginary could not look goofier. How and why did she get in the ship? Why did he blow up in the LCL? You know, it's not that hard to see why so many people like Gendo's instrumentality scene so much. Because all the others are pretty half-assed. This ending is about as cliche as it gets, and a complete spit in the face to the original series. Overall score? 5. Seriously, Neon Genesis Evangelion is best experience going in blind, so I urge you, if you've gotten this far and still haven't watched the original series, pause this video and do it now.
Unfocused Comparisons.
Technology looks more futuristic while looking less technologically advanced. Removed a scene of Shinji wanting to leave on the train, which was a pretty good moment in Neon Genesis, so I don't know why they would want to delete it, other than more runtime. Telling instead of showing the battle plans, making them less interesting than NGE's version. And there's also an added anime-ness to this movie, which the original never had. And frankly, I believe that degrades this film. Asuka's first fight scene is not as impactful as her other first two fights in Neon Genesis. Asuka is more of an asshole than the original series, to a cartoonish effect. Jokes are taken too far, thus making them no longer funny. Hey, do you guys remember when Masato made them live together because they needed to get along immediately to stop the world from ending in a few days? Remember when it was Kaji's idea? There is no point in covering Shinji's vision. It overall lessens the scene, since what made the original so gripping is that Shinji was forced to watch Toji's Eva being ripped apart by his own Eva. By the way, for those who still haven't watched the original series, Evas can cause physical damage on their pilot. So while Toji lost a leg and presumably an arm, Asuka just ends up getting a cool little eye patch. So while Asuka is the pilot now, the scene is overall watered down due to these changes. Karu's death is less impactful since Shinji isn't even the one killing him. Now of course, it's best to compare 4.0 to the end of Evangelion as it resembles it a lot. Surprisingly so. Think about it. Shinji goes through a depression phase, he eventually gets over it, Masato gets shot, and dies.
Kaji, my love, I did do the right thing, didn't I?
Ritsuko tries to kill Gendo, only difference being that she actually shot. Instrumentality starts, this time by Gendo, and Shinji stops it just like an end of Evangelion. Shinji gets the girl, arguably.
How disgusting.
However, there are many changes in these events that completely water down their impact. Let's start with Shinji's depression phase. The reason Shinji was in his sad boy phase in EOE was due to the fact that he killed Karu and you know, beat his meat. The reason in 4.0 was because he saw Karu die and nearly caused fourth impact, which pretty much did nothing. A tad bit watered down considering in Neon Genesis he actually killed Karu himself instead of just watching him die. Still traumatic, but watered down. Now here's the kicker. In EOE, Shinji's phase lasted about a little under 15 minutes. Meanwhile, in 4.0, it lasts over 30 minutes. A little over double the runtime. And that's not even half the problem. In EOE, Shinji's inaction was a refusal to call, which is action with inaction, because he doesn't want to pilot the Eva, which people were calling him to do, specifically Masato. In 4.0, his phase is not action within inaction, because there is no call to refuse. Everyone kinda just lets him be, to which he decides to help out and get back onto the Wunder, thus making there no actual call to refuse. Ritsuko tries to kill Gendo in EOE as revenge for using her by being with her to keep her hard at work for Nerve. Meanwhile, in the rebuilds, this information was never given, begging the question of if it ever happened. This means anyone who's only seen the rebuilds would not know the significance of Ritsuko in particular shooting Gendo.
An AT field? But I got rid of my humanity. Could it be that I am afraid of Shinji?
So you were just like me.
I never knew my parents' love, and yet I became a parent. I feared forming bonds with people. My childhood was filled with days I was alone, so I never felt lonely. I thought a child was a punishment upon myself. Not meeting my child, not being there for him. I thought that would be redemption. I thought that would be best for my son. I'm sorry, Shinji.
Do you want to know what the best part of NGE was? It implied all of that backstory shown in instrumentality, just from one scene in EOE and a few lines of dialogue in the TV series.
And so this is my retribution. Forgive me, Shinji.
Focused Comparisons.
When talking about Eva, you need to talk about characters. And when you talk about characters, you need to talk about character arcs. Yes, character arcs. But what are character arcs? Do you know what character arcs are? Now that I think about it, your mom is as big as an arc. In the end, most people have a pretty rudimentary understanding of what character arcs are. But for this video, I will give you a more precise definition of what a character arc is, which is a character standing between the lie and the truth. Now, you may have noticed that I didn't include characters changing within that definition. That is because there is more types of character arcs than the positive change arc. There are, as previously mentioned, positive change arcs, which, for my sanity, I will call change arcs from now on. Even though it isn't the only arc that involves change within a character, it is the only arc that doesn't really have its own name, so it shouldn't cause for any confusion. Anyways, there are also flat arcs, fall arcs, disillusionment arcs, which are practically the same as the change arc, except they're sad, and there's also corruption arcs. And before you say it, no, Shinji in 4.0 does not have a flat arc. He has a rushed and stupid change arc in the first act and becomes a Gary Stew with no arc throughout the rest of the film, which considerably is a long time to have the main character go with no arc. I'll soon get into why in a moment that is, but
I'm not done.
We also have to talk about a character's want and need. If the protagonist has no want, then there is no story. The protagonist having a strong want for making a story is probably nothing new to you. Just by looking at the shonen genre, you'll find every protagonist has a pretty concrete want. In My Hero Academia, Midoriya wants to be the hero that saves everyone with a smile on his face. In Dragon Ball, Goku wants to be the strongest. In Demon Slayer, Tanjiro wants to turn his sister back into a human. In rewatching the rebuilds, I wanted to shoot my... You get the idea. The purpose of a want is to drive the plot. But now I must ask you, have you ever watched something that just spoke to you? You could feel that the story had meaning and that it was impactful. This is likely because the main character, or supporting cast, had a need, while the want is the conscious desire of the character and what the character thinks he needs in order to be happy or whole. The need of the character is the subconscious desire of the character, and who would have thought is actually what the character needs to be happy or whole. The need is usually in opposition to the want, but it doesn't have to be. If the want is what drives the plot, then the need is what drives the theme. The want and need dynamic is at its best when it's woven into the character arcs. Such as the lie is what the character wants will make him happy or whole, and the truth being that what he needs is actually what will make him happy or whole. As you can see, these methods for making good characters are very compatible and are easy to implement with each other side by side. Nearly all the anime classics have this combination. Now let us put this newfound knowledge of creating good characters and put it to use. Since Shinji is the most complex character in Evangelion, No, not one of the most complex, he is the most complex character. After all, he is the main character, so him being the most complex makes sense. We will use him as an example. So, let us start off with the Neon Genesis Shinji. Shinji has count 'em, two simultaneous character arcs, and 2 want and need dynamics that are woven within those character arcs. Now, it's not rare for a character to have more than one character arc, especially if it's in a very long series, but those character arcs are usually one after the other, while Shinji's character arcs are simultaneous. Now, let me explain. Shinji's first want is that he wants to stop piloting the Evangelion. Now you might be asking upon hearing that, why doesn't he stop piloting if he doesn't want to? Well, the answer lies in his second want, which is that he wants people to love, accept, and subsequently need him. You see, Shinji has a pretty skewed sense of what love is thanks to his father. It's quite noticeable in the beginning episodes that he thinks that he is loved when he is needed. You can see this in episode 4 where he tries to get Masato to admit that she and Nerve need him, but Masato does not confirm it. In fact, she does the exact opposite. And in Shinji's mind, if he isn't needed, he isn't loved. And if piloting the Eva doesn't bring him the love that he wants, then he might as well not pilot at all. It's only after realizing that he is loved that he decides to stay in Tokyo 3. However, he still clings to the idea that he must be needed to be loved, and continues piloting the Eva. It is revealed that Shinji will endure the physical pain of the Eva because him being unloved and lonely is a kind of pain that is far worse. This emotional pain is so much worse that he only starts to put up a fight when he gets put in critical condition, or the Eva brings him the same type of pain that he hoped to avoid by piloting it. Shinji is essentially playing a game of balance throughout the course of Eva, only pursuing the want that brings him the least amount of pain. He is usually putting his want for others to love him at the forefront, since he's not gonna have to pilot the Eva forever. All the angels are gonna die off eventually. However, in the end, it will be Shinji's repressed desire to escape that will bring about third impact. A lot, I know, but no one ever said that Eva was simple. That's enough talking about Shinji's dual wants. It's time that we talk about something that's even more repressed, Shinji's needs. And to talk about Shinji's dual needs, I'll have to talk about Evangelion's themes, as the needs of Shinji are directly tied to them. Themes are, of course, the message, ideas, and philosophy of the story, and are what people mean when they say a story is about something. Themes, for the most part, are supposed to be in the subtext of the story. Evangelion has multiple themes within its story, which isn't necessarily something you're supposed to do, since it can make your story a lot less focused and can confuse your audience of what the message is. Now, as we all know, NGE can be confusing for many reasons, but not because of its themes. That's more to do with its plot. As stated earlier, one theme is ideal as it keeps the story focused. For example, Monster is about human nature, Technolize is about nihilism, and Berserk is about never giving up. I'm sure you're starting to get the idea, and likely you've learned about this in your literature class. Now let me give an example of an anime that follows this rule but still has multiple themes. GTO follows this principle despite having multiple themes. Each theme gets its own focus on each plot arc. After all, GTO isn't just one story, but a collection of stories thrown into one anime, or manga. But there is still another way to keep your themes focused, which is by keeping your themes connected. This is how NGE keeps its themes focused. The main themes of Eva that people tend to talk about the most are depression, loneliness, hating oneself, and escapism. Shinji indulges in escapism, but because Shinji is self-aware of his cowardice, he hates himself. And because he's scared of interacting with others, escapism, and he also believes that he doesn't deserve to be liked, hating himself, he is lonely. And the culmination of the previous theme stated makes him depressed. But something is missing here. I had stated in my rambling that Shinji is aware that he is a coward. But a coward from what? What exactly is Shinji trying to escape that is present in reality or real life? Well, there within lies the theme that people tend to miss. That is, hating pain. Now, when I say hating pain, I'm not talking about the normal distaste people tend to have towards pain. No, Shinji doesn't just dislike pain. He absolutely despises it and will do absolutely anything he can to avoid it. Of course, I'm sure Anno isn't saying that you should love pain, but rather you shouldn't always throw caution to the wind when trying to avoid it, as Shinji does. The need for Shinji's want for people to love him is that he must love himself. And the need for Shinji's want to escape the Eva, or his want of escapism in general, is to accept that pain has its place in life. If you've watched it, you know that these are both things that Shinji learns and accepts by the end of Evangelion. Like, the end. Like the actual ending? Though you get the idea. Shinji throughout Rebuild does not have an overarching character arc, overarching need, nor does he have an overarching want. In Neon Genesis, Shinji's wants and needs carry from episode to episode and stay consistent, while in Rebuild, they don't. While Shinji's old wants and needs seem to be relatively present in 1.0, we all know that's just because it completely copied episode 1 through 6 of the original series. In fact, Shinji showing really any sort of consistent want is when the events clone Eva. Oh, but I could already hear the crying of the righteous defenders of the rebuilds. These are movies, they don't need overarching motivations. They should be able to stand alone anyways. Even though each movie is about to stand alone as an episode of NGE, let's see if we can find any arcs, needs, or wants of Shinji that are exclusive to each film. In 1.0, his wants kind of carry over from the original series, but since they aren't carried over to the rest of the films, they aren't ever really resolved. 1.0's title also implies a change arc of Shinji learning that he's not actually alone. You'd think. Alas, there is no actual arc that Shinji experiences in this film. In 2.0, I honestly couldn't tell you what he wants. Maybe his father's approval? No wait, never mind. Oddly enough, Shinji, the protagonist, takes a back seat in this film, for whatever reason. Really, I could tell you what all the other characters want, easily, because for some reason, Anno thought it would be funny if they all made him want the same thing. Heck, even Kaji wants a slice of Anno's self-insert. Really sticking it to those escapist otaku, aren't we, Anno? 3.0 surprisingly gets the closest to properly utilizing character arcs along with a want and need dynamic. Please note that I said the closest, I'm not actually saying that it gets it right. This is probably the only not title that actually parallels Shinji's so-called arc. In 3.0 he of course has a fall arc, clinging to the lie that he must redo. It is his want, of course. His need or truth is that he cannot redo. Or, in other words, that he should do nothing. I don't think I have to explain how poor of a message that sends. I know there are going to be people in the comments linking me to that wretched Curse of Eva video. It's not like I can tackle the whole video anyways. The video is like 30 minutes long and this video is already long enough. So I'll let myself get a bit sidetracked for this part. Anyway, saying something is essentially bad on purpose is not a proper defense, since the people that don't like these films would be more in line with its message. That doesn't make these films secretly good, it only makes them self-aware. But they wouldn't have to be self-aware if they weren't trash. I'm sure Anno sat there in his writer's room as he wiped his ass with a 10k yen after taking a massive dump on his gold toilet, thinking to himself,
boy, I could really show all those escapists that didn't listen to my message of Neon Genesis by giving them literally everything they asked for. That'll get them to stop.
Do you really think that's what Anno's doing? Do you honestly think that Anno is that dumb? Because I sure as heck don't. Presenting the themes this way makes the message of the film hypocritical at best and non-existent at worst. But that's enough getting sidetracked. Let's get on to Shinji's arc. It's kinda hard to get any other message from this arc because the opposite of him trying to redo would be for him to do nothing. Not to mention the way 3.0 handles its character arcs is awful. You see, pursuing the lie or want should be easy yet, in a way, unfulfilling.
can't possibly last forever. Eventually, I'll be betrayed, and it will abandon me. But still, I want to see them again, because at the time, I know my feelings were real.
It is usually handled by punishing the character for doing so. Meanwhile, pursuing the truth or the need should be hard yet rewarding. This is handled by, who would have thought, rewarding the character. Throughout most of the film, Shinji is being punished whether he is pursuing the lie or the truth of the arc. The only time Shinji is rewarded is when he's hanging out with Kaoru. Not even when he's playing the piano, as the no-name guy implies. He literally has no name. A reward, such as Kaoru taking Shinji's collar, his responsibility, and putting on himself for being in his general vicinity. A reward for doing absolutely nothing. Then again, that part is also inconsistent because he does nothing around everyone else and still gets punished. The only time he doesn't get punished is when he's around Kaoru, excluding the part for when he was trying to redo with Kaoru. Perhaps the true message behind 3.0 is to reject waifu and embrace Kaoru. Listen, I'm aware that Ano is trying to encourage people to get hobbies in basic terms, but how it is presented is horrid and downright confusing. Ano doesn't make Shinji fulfilled with his newfound hobby, but instead, he makes him fulfilled by being with Kaoru. Yeah, I'm sure Shinji is getting filled by Kaoru. I mean, it doesn't help that in 4.0, Kaoru basically said that his whole purpose was to make Shinji happy. Now that I think about it, both Kaoru and Rei are less like characters and more like plot devices. Think about it, all Rei did in 3.0 was push Shinji towards Kaoru because, as we all know, Shinji must be close to Kaoru. It is necessary for the plot of Eva, of course. All Kaoru wants to do is make Shinji happy. He had said so in 2.0 and was criticized for it in 4.0. I mean, it's a lot more believable to think that a man who doesn't want to continue working on Eva anymore halfway into production sloppily wrote these two characters whose only purpose is to push Shinji along the plot and have no other realistic desires, than it is to believe that that same man who's made it clear he doesn't care about Eva or helping out those escapist otaku anymore, to write an elaborate thematic dynamic between those two characters where you have to handpick dialogue and ignore everything else just for it to be contradicted in 4.0. Another part that 3.0 gets wrong in Shinji's arc is that his beliefs lack challenge. Sure, it gets revealed to him that he caused N3I and that Rei is a clone of his mom, but I'm talking about beliefs that are actually related to his arc. That's partly why 3.0 is so boring. After being brought back to Nerve, his lie is never challenged, but rather is reinforced by everyone around him. This is the exact opposite of what you want to do with a fall arc. You want everyone around the character to push Shinji towards the truth as he clings to the lie to the very end. But in 3.0, it's only at the end that his lie actually begins to be challenged, which is far too late for his lie to be challenged. 4.0's handling of arcs is just as bad, if not worse. Remember when I said that Shinji's arc was rushed and stupid? Well, I suppose it's time that we get into why that is. In the first 40 minutes of the film, excluding the Paris fight, Shinji experiences a change arc. His lie is that he believes that people don't like him, and the truth is that nearly everybody loves Shinji. Even those who act like they don't want anything to do with Shinji apparently secretly like him. Oh, and that's not even why I say it's stupid either. The cool thing about Shinji's lie is that he's constantly being challenged. A lot. Too much so. The problem sets in when you realize that his lie is being challenged so much that his belief becomes completely irrational, which in any arc is something that you do not want to do. Sure, you want the lie to be challenged, but you don't want it to the point where that lie becomes completely irrational to believe. Like maybe it'll seem reasonable like right after almost causing fourth impact, but we are well past that point. The protagonist's belief in the lie should still be a bit reasonable and not completely irrational, and yet Shinji's is. Nearly everyone around Shinji does everything they can to cheer him up, short of giving him head. And it's only when Rei tells him that people like him that Shinji becomes aware of the truth. Really? And don't even try feeding me that crap about how it was the straw that broke the camel's back. That back should have been obliterated a long time ago. And that's why it's just stupid. I haven't even talked about how it's rushed. It's not just rushed because it only takes up 40 minutes of a 2-hour and 30-minute long film, but because of how it handles its character development. Now, as ridiculous as it sounds, character development isn't always necessary. You probably don't want your character to show some positive change within a fall arc, now would you? Of course not. That would defeat the purpose. However, it is necessary when it comes to a change arc. And Shinji does change pretty drastically in the end, but any idiot can write a character changing drastically from scene to scene. That's why good character development isn't measured by how much the character changes, but by how realistic that change is. And that's what makes the character development in NGE so good, and is why rush character development isn't. Every scene that Shinji is in where he's supposed to be realizing the truth is the reality of things after being made aware of it, hardly demonstrates it. These scenes hardly last minutes and don't show any changing in Shinji whatsoever. Rather, the scene where we actually see a significant change in Shinji is when Rei explodes right in front of him. The only reason that I've heard why this event would cause a major positive change in Shinji and not a negative change is in a metatextual sense, but explaining why the writer wrote the scene that way doesn't magically cause it to make sense, while aligning with the continuity of Shinji's character. Sure, it'll make me give a nanometer of respect to the person who wrote the story, but bending the quality and continuity of the text to the subtext is still bad writing. And B, even if we took this as some sort of metaphor that Shinji represents the audience and Rei represents waifus, as Mr. No Name says, even though it'd be inconsistent considering that Rei was the person that brought Shinji towards the truth, serving as the metaphorical mentor of his arc, then all the scene says is that waifu-obsessed otaku will experience their waifus being taken away magically, and instead of mourning their wasted time with their waifu, those otaku will suddenly become a functioning member of society again. After all, Shinji isn't the one who disposes of Rei as the otaku who would give up his toxic obsession would, but rather, Rei is just suddenly taken away from Shinji. This is an event that is unlikely to occur in the reality of things, considering the profit that these studios make, like Kara, from these waifus. Because if there's one thing that these companies know, it's to not bite the hand that feeds them, or at least do it as subtly as possible. And that's why I'm trying to argue the likelihood of these man-children moving on. But that's enough talking about the poorly handled subtext. It's time that we talk about Shinji's non-existent arc throughout the rest of the film. Because for some reason, since Shinji knows that everyone likes him, he suddenly has the answers to everything. Shinji, post the first act, becomes a complete Gary Stu, an all-knowing deity that is utterly unfazed by everything around him, whose only human characteristic is that of human appearance. And once again, Shinji does not have a flat arc. Because for him to actually be challenged when it comes to believing the truth, whatever the truth is now, would be blasphemy. It certainly isn't that everyone loves him anymore, because for that to be the truth, his flat arc would be downright retarded. At no point after the first act, Shinji is ever challenged on his newfound ultimate truth. Think about it, multiple people pointing guns at Shinji. He is completely unfazed. Someone shoots at Shinji, Misato takes a bullet for him because he's so based now that people are going out of their way to keep him alive. Having trouble beating an enemy? No problem. His antagonist is simply going to tell Shinji how to defeat him.
Violence and fear are not the criteria upon which our conflict can be resolved.
And then, after requesting for his father, the antagonist, to have a talk, his father will go on a long exposition dump of all of his backstory, problems, and regrets, you name it. Meanwhile, Shinji does the equivalent of sitting back with his arms crossed while shaking his head, knowing that that was literally him moments ago. This movie is insane, and it's even crazier how so many people think it's amazing. As crazy as it may sound, basically every good story uses the same structure. In fact, most of the structure types that are getting thrown around are practically the same, just with a little rewording, but they are all trying to accomplish the same thing. It's pretty funny actually. For this video, I will use Fate Tag's Pyramid as the structure for analysis. For one, its design is very simple and easy to comprehend. And 2, because you are likely already familiar with it in your literature class. However, I doubt they did it much justice, likely due to their definition of the climax stage. It's a common misconception that the use of climax in Freytag's pyramid meant the same as it did then as it does now. Most consider the climax of the story nowadays to be the final showdown and such, or the part that comes right before the end, which is why you see a lot of the times the pyramid is being structured like this. However, the climax, when you consider what Freytag meant by it, goes in the middle, because what we would consider the climax back then is what we call the midpoint now. Hats off to all the literature teachers who taught it like this. But like the midpoint, the climax is supposed to be the major turning point of the story. To know why you need a major turning point in the story, let me give you a little explanation of how 3-act structure works. Most people tend to think that each act of a 3-act structure takes up equal thirds of the story, but that is simply not the case. A more accurate visual representation would look more like this. Whoa, that's a long act 2. That is because each act serves a different role in the story. Act 1 is the setup of the story. Act 2 is the adventure, the journey. Act 2 of the story is the part where the protagonist encounters conflict and pushes against his or her antagonistic forces. Act 3 is where everything finally comes together, where the protagonist faces his or her last obstacle and every character's arc is resolved. In more simple terms, Act 3 is a denouement of the story. Act 1 is supposed to be short because it's the most boring. An Act 1 that is too long will make your story feel stagnant. Act 2 needs a climax or a midpoint because without it the story will feel predictable and stagnant. And Act 3 is the shortest because, well, it's the ending. Can you tell me what will happen if Act 3 is too long? That's right. The story will feel like it's dragging. Now that we got that out of the way, let's talk Evangelion. Let's start with NGE. Now I know this is going to be brought up considering that I will be complaining about the individual movies' lack of midpoints. So I'm going to come out and say it. No, a 20-minute or so anime episode does not need a midpoint. They are simply not long enough for it to be necessary, especially when you consider that a film's typical Act 2 is about 40 minutes plus. It is over double the runtime of an average anime episode. This is why I'm not going to complain when some episodes of NGE don't have a midpoint, but will with these films. They are subsequently longer, thus require a midpoint in order to prevent stagnation. So let's see if NGE has a midpoint in its overarching story. And yes, before you ask, EOE does have a midpoint. It is right at the intermission. Anyways, when watching Neon Genesis, you probably noticed that things have a lot more angst post episode 15. Everyone is just more hostile to each other afterwards. It makes the earlier episodes feel happy-go-lucky, which, they weren't all that happy-go-lucky to begin with. Do you know why? That's right, because episode 15 is the midpoint of Evangelion. Fun fact for you fellas, midpoints are typically presented as a false defeat or win, though it is not necessary to do so. Why do I mention this? Well, the cool thing about NGE is that it does both. You heard me. You have Masato and Kaji as the false win, and Asuka and Shinji as the false defeat. After all, we see Kaji die later down the road, and the end of EOE implies that there is still something there, making them false in the end. I know. Crazy, isn't it? First I tell you that Shinji has 2 simultaneous arcs, and now I'm telling you that it has both a false win and victory? It's almost like there's a reason that NGE was so successful. The cool part about Rebuild is that it has a midpoint in its overarching plot. It even has a false victory and defeat that NGE had. Except, it doesn't do it via parallel scenes as the original did. But hey, the Rebuilds did something right. That's something to celebrate over since they hardly get anything right. Unfortunately, the individual Rebuild films do not have this crucial asset. Other than a complete lack of midpoints, I also have a problem with how the last 2 films handle their acts. The first 2 do fine with them, but 3 and 4? Woo! Ooh, talk about abominable structure. 3.0 splits its acts into nearly equal 30-minute segments. After my simplified explanation of how plot structure works, I don't think that I have to explain why that's a problem. And that's not even bringing up the fact that the Act 2 of 3.0 lacks any actual conflict. Although 4.0 has more conflict within its Act 2, its overall act management is even worse than 3.0's. 4.0's Act 1 lasts almost an hour in this movie. It lasts from here to here, where we reach the inciting incident and continues on to the second act. The second act is about as long as the first act. The introduction portion of the film is as long as the journey of the film. It's not even equal thirds like 3.0. I know you're gonna say it, I like the village part too upon the first watching, but it feels really stagnant the second time since you know that most of what is being shown has absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the story. Literally could have been written to where Shinji is a focus instead of Rei, but my figure sales, am I right, Ano? Would you really call the act of taking away the importance of the protagonist throughout most of the film as well written? Because I sure as heck wouldn't. An excellent example of the new lazy direction that Ano was doing in the rebuilds, other than circling all the cool looking camera angles instead of having intentional cinematography, is 1.0. Well, all the rebuilds directions is quite lackluster, but compared to the original, 1.0 shines the most since it's incredibly similar to NGE despite 1.0 being utterly inferior to the original episodes in every way. Whether it is removing all the original interesting scenes to scrubbing all the substance of what once were compelling scenes, such as the scene of Shinji running away. Although these scenes seem quite similar, it doesn't take long to notice that the original is a lot more deliberate and artistic in its direction. Meanwhile, Rebuild's version is a lot more generic. The original uses the runaway scene to demonstrate Shinji's mental state, while in Rebuild the tone is more like, look at this poor boy, look how sad he is. He's sleeping in a box for goodness sake. Won't you feel bad for this poor boy? Parts like Shinji showing envy for the couple scene in front of him in the theater were cut from the Rebuild version, and replaced with shots of Shinji walking around by himself while melancholic violin music plays in the foreground. Because I, the average anime goer, must be noticeably cued into feeling sympathy for the protagonist, or else I won't know what to feel about the protagonist. Because I am completely incapable of knowing when I should feel sympathy towards a character. Right? I mean, it could be a sitcom for all I know. But why do I even care about the direction? It's not like good direction adds to the overall experience of the anime. Well, it's because the lazy direction from the creator is a good sign that they don't really care about the project they're working on. Heck, just look at the fan service shots in 4.0. Is this the work of someone who is passionate about what they're working on? I wouldn't say so. So what makes people think that Anna would go out of his way to write themes in the meta text? It's not like he demonstrated his passion in the writing of these films either. These films' writing is about as good as mustard on a chocolate cake. Oh yes, and the fan service. I bet you haven't heard enough about the fan service and how bad the fan service is. But in 4.0, did you know the whole movie is actually fan service? At least if you're going off the idea that anything that is just there to service the fans and has no actual purpose in the plot is fan service, then most of what this movie is basically fan service. Another thing that takes me off more than it should is the ending. You see, there's this type of ending that Robert McKee likes to call the ironic climax. The effect of irony on an audience is that wonderful reaction. Ah, life is just like that. We recognize that idealism and pessimism are at the extremes of experience. That life is rarely sunshine and strawberries, nor is it doom and dreck. It is both. Now you might be thinking, Steve, why did you bring this up? Aren't the endings of EOE and 4.0 on those opposite ends of the spectrum? Neither has an ironic climax, right? No. EOE does have an ironic climax. Think about it. At the end of Evangelion, Shinji finally accepts the truth and completes his change arc. but at what cost? His initial decision to start Third Impact has caused mass destruction to, at the very least, where he lived, and perhaps the rest of the world. He wanted to spend reality with his friends again, but who is there to spend it with him? He may have learned his lesson, but it is possible that he had learned it too late. The end of EOE is an ironic climax. Sure, it's more negative than it is positive, but you don't want a perfectly balanced ironic climax. But Key himself even says so later down in the book. I swear I'm not pulling that out of my ass. But all's that to say that EOE does have an ironic ending. And in the end it does give that feeling that, life is just like that. Meanwhile, 4.0's ending feels more like a daydream. I never thought I would see the day where there would be an official release of Ava that's ending lines of dialogue would be Shinji complimenting a girl on her large chest. The way I describe that scene makes the scene sound less goofy than it actually is. Here's probably the most nitpicky out of my nitpicks. This scene with Shinji.
No, I've never done it before. I can't do it.
Like, I understand why he wouldn't want to get in the Ava. I mean, I wouldn't even want to get in that thing. Not because I'm scared of a massive monster out there, but because I hate heights, man. I would rather fight that thing wielding the progressive knife, Dragon Slayer style, on foot than actually get in the robot. But that's beside the point. It's understandable why he wouldn't want to pilot the Ava. But this isn't. It's just fishing. There's nothing to be afraid of. This next nitpick is almost as nitpicky as the last. The naming of the films. What's the point of doing a titling gimmick just to drop it at the last film? And that's not even talking about how they barely fit each film that they're attached to. Especially the first two. You know what? Here are some better fitting names. You Are Alone should be the name of the first film, because, well, he is. You Can Make Connections should be the title of the second film, because he does. You Can't Undo should be the title of the third, because he can't. You Can Be Redeemed should be the title of the fourth, because, oh, you know why. Now you might be wondering, what's so gimmicky about those names? Well, if you add a couple of buts in it, however, you get You Are Alone. But you can make connections. However, you can't undo, but you can be redeemed. You see, it's like poetry, it's pretentious. Well, all that to say, Rebuild of Ava is completely inferior to Neon Genesis. Like, it's not even close. Everything that made the original so good, the rebuilds lack. Because contrary to popular belief, NGE's success was not mostly due to its themes, but the main reason NGE was such a hit was because of its characters, which have heavy influence on the themes. Rebuild of Evangelion is nothing more than a cheap copy. Sure, the characters carry the same traits, but a character's personality traits does not equate to true character. True character comes from a character's beliefs, flaws, arcs, goals, needs, choices and dilemmas, etc. Hardly of which carries over to Shinji's character, even less apply to the other characters. I mean, even a lot of the side characters like Ritsuko, Kaji, and Fuyusuke have their own arcs in NGE. It's not just the main cast. We don't get anything close to that in the rebuilds. And if I didn't love Neon Genesis so much, I wouldn't have made this video. Because Neon Genesis Evangelion is the GOAT. I haven't found much that can compete with it. Not even its own rebuild films come close to its mastery. Although, being better than the rebuild films is not all that hard to do.
Do I think that instead of blowing the budget on those last two fucking episodes, they should have actually drawn out the Misato sex scene that they don't actually show? Yeah. That is my take. But like, did I look up Rule 34 Misato? Maybe I did. Was I thoroughly underwhelmed with the lack of good, art on, at least on fucking Pornhub? Yes.
Since it's pretty difficult to find video reviews for the first 3 films, I will use written reviews for them, and video reviews for the last film. You might be asking, what's the point of me doing this other than mocking them? Well, it's evidence against the idea that people like these films for the metatext, rather than the so-called surface-level story. I'm sick and tired of the gaslighting from the defenders of the Ava rebuilds, attempting to put their critics down because the message went over their heads, when the overwhelming majority of people who like these films have no clue that the alleged metatext exists. And the only people I've seen that actually like these films for the metatext is because they were actively looking for it. I mean, you have to in order to see it. The alleged message of these films is so darn muddled that it would be difficult to spot any message from these films without looking for it. And it's not like this is some sort of commonality with other meta stories. I've seen good meta films with clear themes to them. I can assure you it is only the bad meta stories that have this commonality. Anyways, let's get into those positive reviews. Since 1.0 is extremely similar to the first couple episodes of the original series, I'll skip it and go to 2.0.
Every once in a while an anime movie is released to enormous widespread acclaim. The likes of Akira, Ghost in the Shell and Spirited Away were hailed as sublime, game-changing features. Evangelion 2.0 is no exception.
What?
Bullshit! A film perhaps not as innovative now as the original series was at the time of its release, but nevertheless an awe-inspiring work that raises the bar ever higher, an anime feature up there with the greats. While the first rebuild of the Evangelion movie followed this series closely, events are drastically changed in 2.0. The plot vaguely follows episodes 8 to 19 of the series, and picks up from where the first rebuilt movie left off, but it's during this film that the remake starts becoming the Ramajaning Anno said the rebuild tetralogy would be. A treat for fans new and old. The new canon material does not disappoint, twists and turns.
The plot is as predictable as it gets, especially if you've seen the original.
As expected, our ever-present, new characters enter the fray and the plot takes fresh, astonishing directions while retaining its mysterious, engrossing aura. The pace is near flawless and both veteran fans and new audiences alike will be able to watch with wide-eyed excitement and suspense as the new plot unravels. Rebuild 2.0 excels in its characterization. The charismatic Asuka is introduced, who adds a whole different vibe to the film, and there is yet more original material for fans of the series, as established characters such as Shinji and Rei develop significantly, the latter in directions you may not expect. A completely new character, Mary, also joins the fray. Much of her motivations are shrouded in mystery.
Wow, that's a nice way of saying that she has none.
Which allows the film to stay at a consistent pace and prevents it from becoming bloated, considering the amount of characters and plot developments already at hand, but her presence adds yet another exciting new element, along with some comic relief.
Ha 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 ha, so exciting and funny, I'm pissing myself.
Despite a cast of characters that were established almost 15 years ago, they come across in Rebuild as very fresh, very unpredictable.
What movie did you watch, because it wasn't the one that I saw?
These aren't the same characters from the Evangelion series, they're new interpretations, new versions. With a clean slate comes new directions, new experiences, in areas the film becomes as fresh to longtime fans as it is to new audiences. Rebuild of Evangelion 2.0 is an absolute spectacle. As astonishing to the eyes as it is the ears, this second film is able to outdo the first installment in every aspect. All the while taking the story in thrilling new directions for fans both new and old. A remake would have been too easy for Anno and his team. Instead, they have gone above and beyond, recreating the Evangelion universe we've come to know and love, offering us new interpretations 15 years on, proving, with some ferocity, that Evangelion is far from gone. Rebuild solidifies Evangelion as an absolutely exceptional franchise, continuing to awe-inspire fans the world over, reminding us all why we fell in love with it in the first place.
Firstly,
as if it needs to be pointed out, things in this movie have irrevocably changed from the TV series. So different are the events in this movie, that, even with the 30-second preview at the end of the film, I have no clue what's going to happen in the next movie, which will be called Evangelion Q. Is that things that were considered mysteries of the original TV series and movies are either gone altogether, changed, or spelled out.
Oh shit, I almost gave a fuck.
A lot of the visuals were eye-popping stunning. However, there were times that it looked a bit grainy, kind of like an image that had been upscaled. The music was a bit hit or miss, with some corny music.
Behold, my field unto which I grow my fucks. Notice that it is barren, for I have no fucks to give.
The movie starts with pure action, and as expected from seeing the trailers, there was a good bit of action throughout this movie to balance it all out. There is also some character interaction and development.
Character interaction. Is it possible to not have characters interacting with each other? Over 230 people found this review helpful.
Enough to flesh out the characters like Asuka and Mary. I especially like the cuts of Tokyo 3 bustling and filled with people doing their thing and living their lives. Asuka seemed much more like probably closer to the definition of tsundere.
That sentence should not exist.
Rei smiles a lot more and her caring of Shinji is made obvious.
Oh shit.
Asuka animosity towards Rei is, in no small part, due to Shinji. Mary is crazy, and she has a nice rack.
Now you're just pointing out the obvious. You're not commenting on whether you think it's good or not, you're just stating it. You're just giving a summary at this point, which is fine. I had a summary in a portion of this video, but I also had a review section afterwards. And the problem is that you don't have a review part. You are merely summarizing it and giving it a 10.
Kaji got an unexpectedly large amount of screen time and seems to play a bigger role than in the TV series.
Now you're just lying. One of Kaji's best scenes was straight up stolen by Mari. You call that having a bigger role than in the TV series?
Whether this is true is yet to be seen. Also a good bit of Pinpin, who does a bit of almost talking.
Wow, really? That's crazy. I had no idea that there would be some scenes of Pen in an Evangelion film.
Overall, great movie. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
There is also another review in favor of the alleged meta themes, but let it be known that out of the top 4 reviews, it's at the bottom, having only a little over half the upvotes of the review that isn't really a review and is basically a summary of the film has. Just giving you a little dose of how little most of the Rebuild fans actually care about the meta text. Obviously, it was a little hard finding a positive review of 3.0, but I did find one in the top 4 surprisingly.
Rebuild of Evangelion 3.0 Keep Quickening takes off 14 years after the near third impact that was triggered at the end of Rebuild of Evangelion 2.0 You can not advance. After this lengthy period of time, everything that we have come to familiarize ourselves with from the 2 preceding movies has been drastically and irreversibly transformed. Be warned and brace yourself as you watch this next installment of the Evangelion series. For this is the Evangelion that you are facing, and it will not fail to throw you off your rocker regardless of how well anchored your chair may be. There is no shortage of action in this film, and Evangelion 3.0 delivers quite the powerful punch. The opening sequence is merely a taste of the intense combat that is featured throughout the film. An entire set of new EVA units is introduced in this latest installment for each of the young pilots. The new mecha units are being redesigned and upgraded to beefier and vastly more powerful versions of the predecessors.
Oh shit, I almost gave a fuck.
Which is no surprise considering the large time lapse that has taken place. However, unlike in previous conflicts, the battles that are now being fought are not simply between mankind and angels. With the advent of the near third impact, loyalties have shifted, and Masato Katsurogi's anti-NERV organization WILLE now wages a brutal war against NERV with its flagship, the AAA Wonder, that possesses enough insane power to kill even God. The dramatic changes unveiled in Evangelion 3.0 do not simply limit themselves to merely new EVA units and circumstances. Surprisingly, the most unsettling transformations occur at the human level. Past allies have become each other's mortal enemies in this desperate and merciless battle to determine the future of mankind. Evangelion 3.0 paints a grim blood-red future which is personified by the redesigned returning characters and on the newcomers to the cast. The atrocities of war have been made apparent on the battle-hardened and gloomy faces of the cast.
That's a label too. These are just all labels. You just label everything. That's so fucking lazy. You're a lazy fucker.
It is quickly ascertained that humanity harbors a great contempt for a tragically oblivious and ignorant Shinji Ikari, and it is implied that the responsibility of a dreadful sin weighs heavily on his shoulders. Ironically, much to the contrast of the entire world that has changed around him, Shinji Ikari manifests no change whatsoever despite the time that has passed since his last conscious thoughts. Veterans such as Misato Katsurogi and Gendo Ikari return with menacing demeanors and sporting superfluous eyewear. Unit 02-EVA pilot Ashika Langley Shikanami makes a stunning return with a magnificent patch and her trademarked tsundere compliments. Fans will also rejoice with the coming of Mari Illustrious Makinami's glasses and her perpetual state of latent sexual attractiveness. Koharu Nagiza makes his debut as the new EVA pilot and steals the hearts of many with his enigmatic charisma. In essence, Evangelion 3.0 features the original cast whose colors and identities that have been completely repainted with the red gore of war. Evangelion reprises its role as an animated psychological trip straight to the mental asylum, but unlike the original adaptation, Rebuild of Evangelion manages to fall into the boundaries of comprehension that mere mortals possess. The film itself takes on a grim atmosphere and maintains a subconscious aura of mystery that shrouds the audience in ignorance. Any details concerning the events that occurred within the 14-year time lapse were meticulously withheld for a large part of the movie, and the culmination of this tension has a tendency to leave its viewers in a catatonic state of shock near the film's conclusion. Viewers may expect to suffer symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and exhibit inexplicable confusion with many unanswered questions that will hopefully be resolved in the series finale. Currently, I can attest to the deranged and disturbed mental state. The musical score of Evangelion 3.0 with the long-awaited and highly anticipated Evangelion 3.0 awing its audience with top-tier animation quality and a masterfully executed story. Reaching its conclusion, viewers will be left with even more questions and angst as they wait for the rebuild of Evangelion to draw to its inevitable close. Evangelion 3.0 leaves much to be desired, and perhaps to the dismay of many, its direction may be out of the comfort zone that was presented in the preceding films. It seems that the producers are hell-bent on pursuing the near-suicidal mission of saving the original Neon Genesis Evangelion ending, and in order to achieve this daunting task, they employ the same tactic of screwing over Shinji as many times using the most dastardly means that they can possibly conceive. After all, it is Evangelion, and it is a necessity that the remake lives up to its reputation. One can only dream that they succeed, and I look forward to the day. Now returning to the initial premise of embarking on this arduous and lengthy journey. Have we come one step closer to answering Hideaki Anno's goal of remaking Evangelion as he wanted it to be? Alas, that is a question which can only be answered by Anno himself. However, as witnesses of his artistic masterpieces, each individual of his audience is privy to their own answer to that question. With this, I thank you for reading mine.
There's nothing in here about technique. There's nothing in here about structure. Nothing in here about intention. It's just a bunch of crappy opinions backed up by even crappier comparisons.
Since there are plenty of them, I will be switching over to video reviews for 3.0 plus 1.0, as stated prior. I really have a good laugh at a lot of the day one reviews since they hardly put any thought into their review, and let their hype from their quick watch guide their takes.
Does Shinji ever get into the damn robot? So go ahead and smash that like, just like how Asuka smashes Shinji.
Well, that's a pretty roundabout way of telling people not to like your video. But that reminds me, if you have gotten this far into the video, then I recommend that you like and subscribe. Because if you like the video, it will get the vid more attention. Plus, you'll see others like it, including more of mine. And you're recommended. It's a win-win for both of us. Especially if you hit that notification bell. That would be super based of you.
I will say that this does feel like the best portrayal for Shinji's character, both at his low and high times.
No.
The first time watching this, I thought it was Rei and Asuka both helping Shinji to push forward. But no, it's actually even better. All three of them helping each other to grow and develop.
How about you grow some melons?
I freaking love this dynamic. Talking about Asuka, recently rewatching the Rebuild films, you don't get enough of Asuka in these.
Good.
I also mentioned Asuka gets the standout moment for the film. She gets that precious god-tier animation scene.
God-tier animation scene.
Whether Rei smiles, cries, blushes, she commands her full attention. If it says anything, I'm moving my plans up to get a figure for her sooner rather than later.
Is it too late now to say that I told you so?
Getting to someone that's not like the others, Mari. Definitely let me know your thoughts on her. She easily gets the most to do in this movie from all of the Eva movies. I've always wanted to like her quirky character, but at the same time I've always felt that you never got enough of her.
Good. I wish there was a lot less of her. I wish she wasn't even in these films. She does not belong. And Ano had no idea of what role he even wanted to give her. She should have never been put into these films.
Unfortunately, this really highlights that I think Mari is an extra that could easily be replaced. As for Misato, you actually have her completing her character arc.
You don't know what a character arc is.
As for Father of the Year Gendo, this final Evangelion movie helps you fully to understand his character and motivations, at least for the Rebuild films. You get a closure to his arc.
Wow, you used it correctly that time. It's too bad that he's the only one with an arc in these films. It's even sadder when you realize that his arc isn't even well developed either.
How the actual movie is split up feels like it shouldn't work.
Yeah, cause it doesn't.
In a lot of ways, this first hour demonstrates what's been missing from the Rebuild films.
Nah. Filler has always been a part of these films.
Particularly stood out was the passage of time. The movie does use a few subtle but clever tricks to show the time flowing, really taking the show don't tell approach.
Oh, what was that? Sorry, I couldn't hear you through all the verbal exposition dumping.
For Rei fans, sorry. Rei is surprisingly almost completely removed from anything flashy. She's only there to get head pats.
Woo, smells like a virgin in here. Nah, I'm just messing with you. But that was the cringiest thing that I've heard all month.
For the second issue, any Eva versus Eva fight. It looked like it came straight out of one of those Walmart Chinese mobile games. It was so bad my Japanese buddy turned over to me in horror when it came up.
Based friend.
But was it worth the wait? Seriously, I would say no.
It's for you again.
For the fun top 10 anime question of the year, right now I do feel like this film easily gets a spot in that.
Oh, sorry they hung up. Yeah, no point continuing. Next vid.
Evangelion is a series that never fails to offer something interesting.
I beg to differ.
After many films, we finally reached a point where we can most likely say goodbye to these characters.
Should have let it go at EOE.
So it's crazy to know this film actually came out and that I watched it, having the feel of a late 90s, early 2000s anime, but with the look of a modern anime.
What about it makes it feel like a late 90s anime?
I was honestly scared to go into this film. What if the writing is awful? What if the CGI is shit? Well, I didn't have to worry so much because this is both a well-written film and a visually stunning one.
Objection, hearsay.
This is one of the most visually stunning anime I've watched, period.
Guess you haven't seen many anime films.
Not as meaningful as End of Evangelion in visuals.
It's not as meaningful as End of Evangelion. Period.
There are so many visual callbacks to previous Evangelion projects, especially the ones done in the 90s.
None of which are handled well.
They made me giddy every time I noticed one, and actually had plot relevance, which is great.
No, they did not.
I just can't believe how well done some of the fan service in this film is.
At least you acknowledge that it's fan service.
I know that I've heard many people hate the film for the couples, but I literally don't give a fuck. They were just fine to me. It's a series about giant robots, psychological torment, hope, and philosophy. While it does have hints of romance here and there, more so in this film than any other, it isn't extremely frequent.
It has giant robots. Doesn't mean it's about giant robots. It has psychological torment. It does not mean that it is about psychological torment. and this one only applies to the original anime, it uses the psychology of Jung and Freud as a way to create an argument for its themes. It does not mean it's about philosophy. Fundamentally, Evangelion is about escapism and its characters. The cool thing about NGE is that it uses all three to create character depth and dimension to the characters, while Rebuild contains the first two out of obligation. After all, the original had them, so why not Rebuild? The thing is, the Rebuilds completely miss the point of having them there in the first place. All that to say that both have considerable amounts of romance, but both use it in different ways. While the original uses it to add depth and dimension, the Rebuilds use it for fan service. You must have some memory loss because neither versions of Eva are sparse in the romance department. 2.0 might as well be a slice of life romance that has hints of giant robots and psychological torment, not the other way around. Even 3.0 has its fair share of romance. More likely, the reason that you believe there wasn't much romance in either is due to the fact that the Rebuild films are forgettable. And while Rebuild likes to shove it in your face, NGE likes to be more subtle about its romance, which in my opinion, allows the chemistry among the characters to shine through. Because if you're shoving how much the characters like each other into the faces of the audience, then let me let you in on a little secret. You're doing it wrong. I'm sure why people actually care about the romance is because they care about these characters. People want the protagonist to end up with a character that is built up to be their partner. They are probably not going to be too happy to see that the protag end up with a character that, at no point, was a love interest. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, like me, you don't give a rat's fat nuts about these characters either. But the Phantom Menace effect does seem to be quite blinding.
That's one thing the previous film didn't do much of, rather focusing on action and Shinji deluding himself, which is one of the reasons why I had major problems with that film.
What do you mean? This film has plenty of Shinji deluding himself and plenty of non-stop action, just like 3.0. Each takes up a little over 2/5 of the film. It appears to me that you're just making up reasons to like the film because you yourself aren't really sure on why you like it.
It's way too fast-paced and feels more like a prologue.
3.0 was not fast-paced in the slightest, it just had a lot of filler in it, which caused it to rush its important scenes.
I've always seen the original series and End of Evangelion as standalone, as I'm sure many people do. So when you detach those from the rebuilt films, you find yourself appreciating it much more.
Yeah, I suppose it would, since it makes it harder to see everything that the rebuild lacks. Yeah, you know what, I'm calling it here. I'm gonna do a reverse rebuild and skip all the nonsense and talk about what matters, because I'm sure at this point you get the idea by now. If I have to keep picking a fight with every point that I find stupid, I'm gonna put a bullet through my head.
Which is why I think you'll get more out of this movie if you watch it emotionally rather than intellectually, especially if you're going through a similar depression like Anno did when he was making Eva. Now this might sound like a diss, and it can be to some people since I'm basically saying the writing is trash, but I think the best way to appreciate the rebuilds, instead of trying to objectively state why they suck, because you can easily do that, it's not hard, detach yourself from the Eva franchise and just look at it as a doorway to Anno's soul. You'll start to feel his nostalgia for childhood, his failed relationships with people, his inability to let go of his past failures, and it ultimately ends with him doing what he can to help his fans be in a better place mentally.
Oh yes, but of course, I'm watching the movies wrong. Yeah, no crap, I'm gonna get more of these films if I turn my brain off. But why should I? I'm not gonna get anything from it that I can't get from NGE. I never needed to do so with the original, so why should I now? Why couldn't he just create another story with the same quality of writing? It doesn't matter if he puts his nostalgia into the film, because he wasn't willing to put any effort into the writing. You admit it yourself by saying this. There is no point in getting people to lower their standards in the attempt of getting them to enjoy something for a reason that most ordinary people would not care about. I'm sure you'll convince most Eva fans because most worship Anno. Anyways, there's also this clip from Trash Taste where these two goofs just praise the film for being an ending.
It's the type of movie that you can't just clean up with the word good.
Yeah.
Or bad.
Yeah.
Because it's neither of those. It's just like...
That sounds like it's mediocre.
It's definitely not mediocre.
But now that I've watched it a few times, I think there's actually fairly... You can kind of stuff it into a pretty traditional 3-act structure, right? The first act, you have the hook in the beginning with the Paris operation. The first act is the Ghibli village, which is Shinji slowly accepting the call to adventure, right? He's reluctant. He's been refusal of the call the entire time in the village until...
As discussed earlier, there is no call for him to refuse. Just because he's not doing anything in the beginning does not mean he is refusing some sort of call. Because guess what? No one is really calling him to do anything that is relevant to the story. You might see Asuka trying to get him to help out, but him helping out the village is not the adventure that he ends up taking on, thus nullifying the call to adventure. That's not even mentioning if he was refusing a call, he refuses it for way too long, which really bogs down the film.
A certain point happens and he's like, okay, I will take on this this duty once again. And then you get start of the second act, which is fun and games, and that's him getting on the Wonder, and it's kind of chill for a little bit until the second act, which is Operation Yamato. And that's the second act. And when Yamato fails, that's the Dark Night of the Soul.
Good golly, are you mixing Hero's Journey with Save the Cat? Like, yeah, I get they're practically the same with different wording, but at least keep your terms consistent if you're gonna use one.
That's when you think everything has gone to shit and nothing will ever work and we're all doomed. And honestly, when I did watch it in the movie theater, I thought we were doomed. I thought that was... Well, I knew that it was not the end of the movie, but I did feel like this was a pickle they couldn't get themselves out of. So it was a very effective Dark Night of the Soul for me, a very effective end of the second act for me, even though I wasn't aware, I wasn't thinking about in those terms. Then we have the third act, which is the final attempt to solve this problem that we're facing. And we have the end of Evangelion reoccurrence and reprisal. Third act.
Bro, you just skipped like 80% of Save the Cat and acted like it followed the structure perfectly, when it doesn't even come close. If you've read Save the Cat, you'd know that Blake Snyder only allows for 40 beats and a standard length film, 10 of which are in Act 1, or in other words, 25%. That means a well-structured film should be 25% Act 1, 50% Act 2, and 25% Act 3. After all, acts are basically Hollywood speak for intro, adventure, ending. And guess what? The intro shouldn't take up as much time as the adventure does.
They're actually surprisingly 3-act structure based.
Just because a story has an intro, adventure, and end does not mean it handles its acts properly. Because Act 1 can be too long, like in this film. Act 2 can be too stagnant and predictable, like in this film. And Act 3 can drag on for too long, like in Hunter x Hunter. I'm kind of surprised that Goji just didn't say anything about this after Ono Cinema's little rant, or whatever. But I guess it doesn't matter because I'm doing it now. I'm sure you realize by now that the answer to if the Evangelion rebuilds were ever good is a resounding no. By looking at Ano's past works, it's easy to see that he is quite competent in writing. So what exactly happened when he wrote the rebuilds? Why exactly did he make them? Well, truthfully, I'm under the impression that he doesn't really care about the Eva rebuilds. It's pretty clear that he just wrote in 4.0 whatever would please the fans in Act 1 and Act 2 and then dedicated the third act to himself, which the fans ended up loving anyways, because as we all know, Eva fans are obsessed with Ano. Before Thrice Upon a Time, it seemed pretty 50-50 about whether the rebuild films were good or not, and that 50 that thought it was good also was pretty split on why it was good. A few said it was good because of its hidden themes that were once again tackling the subject of escapism again, while most fell in love with the escapism factor of it and then called it well written. But let's be real for a moment. It doesn't make sense for Ono to create these meta themes within the rebuilds because all that would do is preach to the choir, and that will accomplish nothing. There is no reason for Ono to do that. It's not productive and it's a waste of time. These films are clearly meant for Eva fans that didn't care for the message of Neon Genesis. In simple terms, this tetralogy's whole purpose is to make money. It was to assure that he and his staff would be able to receive the benefits that they should have gotten from NGE. It's also likely that he wanted to make up for the royalties that he lost when Gainax sold off his IPs. I also partly believe that in the beginning he also did plan on making the rebuilds good, since it was also mentioned by him that most of the works that he could come up with were practically shallow copies of the original series. However, instead of receiving the inspiration that he thought he would achieve, he became creatively bankrupt. He made what he feared most, a shallow copy of Neon Genesis. It's clear by the time he was done with 3.0 that he had enough of Eva, which is why he started working on Shin Godzilla instead. And finally, after rework, delay after delay, he finally became free from the shackles of Eva.